I'll let John fix.
Okay.
Well, hello, guys. I think we lost our connection here from the Mystery North Carolina Beach, and I apologize for that. So we started a new stream here with Professor Hamamoto and George Webb joining us remotely via Skype. And we were just talking to Professor Hamamoto, was describing an entity in Paris, France, called the OECD. And tell us more about that, Professor, so we can pick up where we left off.
The OECD had a day-and-a-half conference in Washington, D.C. in 2016, and the title of the conference was called Neurotechnology in Society, subtitled Strengthening RRI, and RRI stands for Responsible Research and Innovation. And that's really a question-begging title if I've ever heard one. Strengthening RRI in Brain Science, held 15 through 16 September 2016, as I mentioned, in DC. That is the MIT Media Lab, a Negroponte deep state, if you will, model that the nemologists and the showboaters with the bullhorns have zero awareness of. It's sort of a feel-good, ecstatic politics that they have been kettled and lured into, and it's going to go nowhere. And George, I didn't want to bring it up, but you alluded to the fact of a hose down, possibly, for the next go-around. And George, before we were cut off, you had some deep insight into the OECD and Carter Page. I wonder if you could expound on that.
Well, yeah, I remember reading his book, and one of the things I don't remember, that during the news drops during the Carter Page 2018, going to Senate and House to testify and so forth, one of the things, a lot of the testimony was not public, but then there was Adam Schiff doing these leaks every day of the testimony. I didn't realize that one of the stops he made after he was visiting with Madeleine Albright before he goes to Russia to meet with Sechin and Rosneft and all that, Belt and Road and all that, is OECD. And he meets with, he of course studied in France. He was a scholar in southern France near Lourdes. And he speaks very beautiful French, and he was this kind of liaison, like you're saying, and this is sort of like, I don't want to say a NATO cutout, this OECD, but it is sort of this dark hand on American politics, and it's one of those European dark hands that always sounds, so much in the clouds where you couldn't possibly understand it even if you were there all 3 days of the conference. People couldn't tell you what it was about after it was over. But they could tell you what the after-dinner conversations were about, which is, we need to get Trump over to the ambassador's house with the Oconus lures. How are we going to do that tonight?
Yes.
What are you doing coming over here thinking about robotics and all this stuff when he's in the middle of being planted in the Trump campaign and getting all these FISA documents and unmaskings on all the Trump inner circle. So you wonder if some of these, if OECD, and this, I don't know if you remember a name by the name of Kavalek, she reported directly to Victoria Nuland.
I did not. No.
Yeah, she was one of the spying these kids that were being brought over, and she met with Carter Page down the stretch, associated with OECD, and she had been involved in OECD overseas before she had ever gotten her kind of deputy position at the State Department for Eastern European affairs. So I just think it's one of those interesting stepping stone positions that you do at the State Department before you become anointed deep state, anointed. And I'm interested that you would point that out.
Now, that's an important historical data point that you bring in, the Carter Page connection. I think it's much more profound than you might imagine. Let me just detail that, the composition of that day and a half conference back in 2016. And this is from their own article. They have a journal called the Journal of Responsible Innovation. Journal of Responsible Innovation, and it's going to be just the opposite of that. But from the Journal of Responsible Innovation itself, it describes that workshop as being composed of experts from 16 different countries, including representatives from major brain research initiatives, and I have the list of them. They're from all the developed countries, all the G8 countries, Japan, Germany, France, US, and so on. From the major brain research initiatives, government agencies, philanthropic organizations, business, and academia. So yes, while they are setting up to attack the groinal area, they're also conceptualizing it at the intellectual. Their approach is two-pronged. One hits the brain, and the other hits the groin. Right. So yes,
well,
they were doing business, and that is the government. And President Trump does not understand that he is part of the problem. It could be his advisors are part of the OECD network and are keeping him in the dark. But that is the crux of the problem. That is, if you want to say there's one institution, it's not the Freemasons, it's not the Illuminati, it's not the usual suspects, right? It would be the OECD of Emmanuel Macron, who of course is a Rothschild banker, is he not?
Yeah, I believe he does bear a certain coat of arms in his in the bathroom.
And he was also a product of intergenerational child abuse, which is one of my other themes. The conspiracy of silence, trauma of incest, V.C. Andrews, which I'll talk about next week, by the way, when George is on vacation from Thanksgiving. I'll be with your permission, I'll be here live streaming, eating my Hungry Man turkey dinner. And talking about V.C. Andrews and this whole network that Task Force was talking about, because that's part of the spell. I'm saying Ali Alexander says stop the steal. I say stop the spell. The spell is the ensorcelment of this multi-generational incest trauma that has mesmerized not just the leadership, but also ordinary families, according to the literature I'm finding incredible reams and reams, dozens of academic articles to talk about the pervasiveness of what I thought was crazy when I was reading V.C. Andrews' Flowers in the Attic. And I've been watching all these Lifetime movies. Those Lifetime Channel movies have done more to demoralize women in American society than any number of academic feminists of the last 20 to 30 years. Lifetime Channel. I found out, for example, that it was Lifetime that broadcast Surviving R. Kelly. 6 programs of how he enslaved women, young African-American women, just like Nixium, putting them in little cells and make them urinate in buckets and pails. Some of these women have never been seen from again. And this is Lifetime. And it's not about R. Kelly. It's about the demoralization of the American woman. And I think part of the problem is that we men we trivialize their problems. We say, oh, that's a Lifetime Channel deal. And as a result, a vacuum was created for these sorcerers, the witches, really, to come in with their practical magic and politicize their alienation, their hurt, their trauma, and their injury. And this is what we have not been able to offer. This is what we're really fighting now in the streets. And Mr. Ali Alexander is oblivious to it. He's a meme master. He's right. Generation X, social media equals politics, right. Which I think is a fatal mistake.
Well, I'm sorry to jump in, John, but for the past 6 weeks or 2 months, Peter Duke has just been mesmerized, if you will.
Ensorcelled.
By this book by Kathy. want to say it's Kathy Griffin. I might be making a mistake on that.
No, it's O'Brien.
Kathy O'Brien, yes. Kathy O'Brien. And then she has a very Kay Griffin-like story. And you just can't believe the book. And you think, if any of this is true, this kind of deep trauma to then make putty of these kids to then mold them any way they want is scary, very scary.
John, you're familiar with the book, as I am.
Well, all I can say is that I'm glad that she's getting some attention. I've been aware of her work for maybe 10 years now, and it's always been one of those subjects that can only rise so high on the radar screen. It's like it goes up maybe up to a 5%, and then it gets bounced back down again, and you don't hear from her for a while, and then but obviously there's a lot of interest in what she has to say, and I think it is part of what maybe can wake people up, because people like you, Professor, and you, George, if you read the book and you find it to be credible, then a lot of people are going to follow your lead. And the more people that talk about her work and what she's done, the more likely we're going to have a sufficient visibility that things can actually be done. I also recognize very much the work of Kay Griggs, and I think that people ought to know her and just watch her YouTubes. I mean, there's like 4 hours of fantastic interviews in which she demonstrates not only that she has the absolute inside scoop on this because she saw it all, but also that she's a very brilliant woman who's, I think, has a master's degree and can tell you a lot about the early history of the United States and how she studied the coincidence of the simultaneous deaths on 1825 of both Adams and Jefferson, and how, looking into the esoteric behind that, she was there. She was a very brilliant lady, and so there's a lot of those folks out there that have been whistleblowers, for decades, and maybe now's the time for them. But I'm gonna go back to George's question toward the beginning of the show about this new development of the acting Secretary of Defense. His name was Christopher Miller, I think, who has designated that the Deputy Secretary of Defense will have that all special ops will report to the OSD now, the Office of Secretary of Defense, which a lot of people on Twitter, I mean, I was just really touched that maybe I'd say 40, 50 people heard the resonance of Saxa when that was announced and said, "Wow, that if all that Trump can do is to give us that resonance of, hey, I hear you, I hear you. We've got to get special ops away from the spooks and put it back under the military." And
yes.
And, ironically, when we study Fletcher Prouty and what he's taught us and observe the way that the Joint Chiefs vis-a-vis special ops now, when perhaps on paper it's a promotion to be at the level of the various services, in fact, in practical terms, it's a demotion. Because up until this order is given, it is the CIA that has the upper hand. that says to the Joint Chiefs, you shall deliver, 150 helicopters and 250, maintenance men and, all of this. It's like they have to follow what the CIA tells them they want. And so this is Operation Switchback. It's take it back from the CIA, put it back in the hands of the military, unless, the National Security Council might say in a special case, this one's a small one, you guys are better equipped to do it, so just do it. But in general, I find it very, very resonant of and what I've called for, and it's part of my work, is to say, seriously, folks, seriously, we've got to stop letting the spooks run our special ops without any oversight, without Congress knowing. And Congress, of course, now just willingly turns its back and closes its eyes. There to move past that, and that is NSAM 57, and study that in Fletcher Prouty's book Secret Team, about National Security Action Memorandum 57, which is what is referred to by some of the folks that I read on Twitter today. A lot of people really are following this very closely. So thank you, George, for asking me, and that was very touching to me, and I think the president may be more aware of McDuff's story than anybody is aware of yet. So that is fascinating. As far as can I just, while I have the floor for a second, Professor Hamamoto, the answer is education of the JFK assassination as a coup d'etat. It can't just be taught as, well, this president died, so the next president was Johnson. It can't be taught that way. It's a lie. It is the fundamental lie of the PSYOP that you're talking about. And it's been driven, by the Warren Commission, by the Dulleses, by all of the stuff that we've shown in the 10 or 12 books that I've read on my show. All of this stuff adds up to tell us that the big lie is that the Constitution continued. It didn't. It stopped on the 22nd of November 1963 because the government that followed John Kennedy was not the government that John Kennedy was the president of. It was a new regime. And this new regime is what we call the deep state. It's what we call the new world order that has been creeping into every facet of our lives, our government, our corporations, our big businesses, our churches, for God's sake. They are in everything. And this, right now, is the time that we're going to have. We've just got to stand up. We've got to get up, stand up, and don't give up the fight. But it's not going to be with bullhorns and marches. It's going to have to be with going to Congress. It's going to be all about draining the swamp. Forget about President Trump. Obviously would have drained it by now if he can drain it. The only people that can drain it are the people of this country. We have got to go to each congressional district. We've got to go to each office on Capitol Hill. And we've got to go to our particular representatives, and we've got to spell it out to them that we demand freedom, liberty, justice, all the things we were promised. We demand them. And we need transparency. We need transparency in our budgeting, and we need to rein in this monster that has been going around like some kind of a Pac-Man, just grabbing up all of the people, resources, grinding it up, turning it into capital, and now they've spent so much money, they still need more money from us. It's just our job, guys. Nobody else can do it. The American people are the ones that have to shoulder this burden.
Right. Hashtag stop the spell. We've been under the spell since November 22nd, 1963. And if I may amplify what George Webb just said, I think it's nothing less than providential that John O'Loughlin went on air in the media, YouTube, over 2 years ago with a very personal story about his father's struggle. And he's reaching back, his father is reaching back to us and pulling us back up and saying, back into the light of freedom, saying, this is the story, this is the true history. Get over it. All the mythology, all the fairy tales that you've been told, it's BS. And now it's reaching the ears of the White House. The spell is in the process of being broken, and it's not going to be done through Twitter. That's the instrument of the enemy. It's going to be done through John O'Loughlin's readings, just plain old-fashioned books. L. Fletcher Prouty. Come on. Kathy Griggs. Kathy O'Brien's book. She has a couple of good books that people need to read, but you could also check out her work on YouTube. It's still there, so far as I remember. You can find this information. This is education. If you want to call it education, it's fine. I call it stopping the spell, stopping the ensorcelment, because there is a supernatural force that is at play here. And I know hard-headed empiricists, scientists, computer science, IT people, perhaps attorneys cannot admit that into their worldview. But this is really on the level of metaphysics. That's not going to be taken care of with a bullhorn or an MRAP. An armored vehicle. And John, going on your own talk earlier today, maybe it was yesterday, you were citing this book by Gordon Wood, Empire of Liberty. Why is liberty feminine? Why is liberty a woman? Have you ever asked yourself the question, why do we have the statue? Why is she a woman?
Let's see. I think it's one of the Greek.
They're attacking women. They're attacking this part of the species in order to destroy all of humanity. I think that's what's going on. All the Lifetime television, all the pharmaceuticals, of which 75% women are on antidepressants, the birth control. I mean, they have been assaulted, upside down, every which way you can imagine. And what is it doing? It's the Illuminati attacking of the feminine. I'm not talking about the New Age sacred feminine, which is another psyops. I'm talking about the real, genuine, universal female principle that we have abdicated and we're not listening to. In fact, we've repressed it. We've oppressed it.
Well, I want to say libertas. I'm trying to remember my Latin, and you've caught me unawares on the reference, but it is a good question. I do think both of you guys are hitting on something, which is, if you start out a story with a falsehood, the rest, everything, all the foundation is going to be crap. If you start out with saying that it's one lone gunman, you're never going to understand the history of the United States for our lives. If you start out, like John said, with this was a coup, and don't even start talking to me unless you start with that as your square one, and we rebuild based on that. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and that it's so fundamental. And I keep pointing to, obviously I wrote a book about Macduff as a great inspiration, and I just remember going to just every person I've met who's read the book, who carries it and as a kind of one person giving it to another. This speaks to your power as an author, Dr. Hamamoto, with Servitors of Empire, with the power of those ideas. I think if you go to the march, carry Servitors of Empire in a million-man march and give 10 books to other people, because it is the common sense type pamphlet that did cause the American Revolution. It wasn't just people going out and firing muskets on Lexington Green. It was an ideological revolution. So I agree with you on that, Dr. Kamamoto, and I agree with John that you have to smash these old icons, these old canards that are false, the foundation has to be laid. He's an attorney, so he knows you have to lay the foundation with the jury. And I agree with both of you. If you know, the communists had their little red book, you know, the Germans had their Mein Kampf. I certainly don't. I'm not want to go down a false ideology, but I think we have our common sense, and we can go out again and say, hey, we've been screwed. You know, this started everything since Kennedy is illegitimate. We need to rebuild this thing from the ground up. Maybe that's what's behind this thing with Ezra Watnick, Cohen Watnick, and Chris Miller. If you talk to people like Jeffrey Prather and Paul Cottrell, they believe it is. So I'm all ears to the ground listening to see if that's maybe what's happening. I hear that Trump, from some circles, Tim Spencer called me today and said Biden has been indicted for a Class A felony in Ukraine. Biden had been somehow declared a national security risk. I don't know the veracity of these things, but I'm certainly all ears now for the next coming days.
Let me ask you before you recede into your all ears mode to address for me the Sidney Powell comments today. I think that there's two things that are really on my mind. Number one, your comments about they didn't go to the Belgrade point, and number two, what about what's going on with these curfews now? These 10 p.m. curfews. 10 p.m. curfews. All these states. California just announced a 10 p.m. curfew. Professor, what's up with that? I mean, they're saying it's all about COVID, but I just don't buy it. I think there's something else going on, guys.
Well, I'm sorry, Doctor.
No, please go ahead, George.
I have this Sons of Liberty in my head now. You know, thou shalt not meet in groups of greater than three, the British edicts in the colonies. I think they feel this. I think there's a palpate sense of something's afoot here. And I'm certainly not a part of any subversive group. We're all transparent above the board. We freely trade our ideas and so forth. But I do notice, like you say, John, Ohio is on 10 p.m. Vermont, you can't go over to your friend's house. You have to wear your mask in your home now in Pennsylvania. All these things seem to be shut down, locked down, things that you would do when you're about ready to invade a country. Don't go out of your house. Make sure that you're pacified. You know, you pacify the local natives. So that's what it feels like.
And is Trump part of this?
I don't think so. I think Trump's the counter. I think it's beyond Trump in a way. I think there is a big spontaneous flow. If you were in D.C., you know, and I got there late, but I interviewed a lot of people, and they felt like, you know, there's that McDuff moment, I call it, where it's, you know, here's McDuff thinking about, hey, I'm going up against the CIA, and this is family. I'm putting my family on the line. And how far do you go? How are you willing to give your own life? Are you willing to sacrifice the life of your family? And I just get the sense so far from spending the time I did with John, McDuff was willing to go up to the point of sacrificing his life, but not sacrificing the life of his family. And trying to draw a very bright line, you know, keep that distance. And that's sort of what I felt in Washington. And Addie certainly was there longer, but I did get that sense of it's now or never kind of feeling, where people were like, I'll stay here and get run over by the MRAP. You know, that we're all remember that image of that Chinese young man who stood in front of the tank at Tiananmen Square, where he said, okay, I'm not going to grow up in a world where we're all slaves. and I'll move to the left if the tank's going to go to the left. I'll move to the right if the tank's going to go to the right. I'd never seen that steel conviction before, and a lot of the people coming to DC, it's usually more of a frolic, and this was something different. I don't know, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I do agree that there were the glad handers and the bullhorn, and Alex with his kind of loudmouth style kind of came in and tried to run in front of the parade, but the undercurrent of it really was something different, I think.
Well, I'm grateful for that report, because if you had been watching InfoWars or the Alexander extravaganza, you would think those were the only two people out there who were making a difference. But according to you, there were hundreds of thousands of more who had a steely determination to ensure that the crisis machine is going to be not only slowed down but brought to a grinding halt. And once we disenchant them, once we break the spell amongst the people who are pulling the levers themselves, the lower level people who realize that they're going to be rolled over, that they're being set up as patsies, then we have a chance. I think that's where the focus should be, turning the people who are pulling the police, the military, who are the city council people, business people who are still abiding by the draconian diktats of the bankers, of the OECD, of the Macron types, the Rothschild,
and the governors.
I smell a book here. another great by Dr. Hamamoto. Something like Last Chance for Liberty or something along that line. And Liberty's in the title.
It's probably going to be called The Politics of Incest.
Or the one I hear is liberty or servitor.
Because
I love the word servitor. It's such a beautiful word, because what it means is this halfway quasi space between being a slave and just not knowing it.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's what we're looking at. And we won't be called slaves, but this new shutdown, lockdown, no Bill of Rights kind of world that we're heading into, a dystopian world, is kind of a servitor world. And I would love to help, chuck some notes your way and an outline your way, because I think that's a good title.
Thank you very much, George. It's the twilight, right? The occultists are very much familiar with twilight language and twilight consciousness. They like to keep us in the twilight zone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To paraphrase one of the prominent Ohioans, Rod Serling.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Okay. Well, servitor or libator. Okay, we'll keep working on this.
We'll work on it, George.
We'll work on
it. Hey, George, would you give me a minute on Belgrade and the importance of Sidney Powell directing their attention to that particular aspect of their investigation?
Well, John, I don't know what Sidney Powell has in her hands. I know that Farmer Jones, another learned attorney like yourself, talked to this investigative service in Texas that is run by this guy named Rams Land, R-A-M-S Land. And he had taken apart the Dominion voting machines. He'd done a forensic analysis. He has a lot of guys, McDuff types that are working for him. And he had said that he had worked with Sidney Powell in the past and that they were potentially working on this project. So I'm sure that she has the best information possible, and I don't want to undermine her in any way, because I just don't know what she's working on.
Okay.
All I can do as a network guy and a network analyst look at the IP addresses that I have. Paul Cottrell confirmed them, and you can just do a who is on the Dominion voting and see that it maps back to Belgrade. And from the beginning of our series for 4 years now, we've been talking about how the psychological operations in Europe, Africa, because AFRICOM used to be a part of EUCOM, European Command, and were run out of Belgrade, and this company or this organization called OTPOR, OTPOR, which became a group called Canvas, which the N and the V in Canvas is for nonviolent, which means low intensity operations, meaning you knock people out for promotions and so forth, but you're not killing anybody. You're doing psychological operations and campaigns and so forth. But that's been going on pretty much in lockstep with this Dominion voting. I mean, they literally share office space. So you wonder, and they're both been around since like the late 90s, and you just wonder, where did all these people come from, and why are they being used now in the United States, especially after 2016, which is we had all this foreign interference. And Trump does have this executive order 13848 that says any foreign interference you can throw in the special forces. If there's a security threat, special forces can be called on. So does this mean that Ezra, the first thing that went to my mind was, you put a Macduff type of person in there now, and you have the goods. If you have the goods, if Sidney Powell is right and it comes from Venezuela, or you have the goods and it's coming from Belgrade, wherever the foreign interference is coming from, that you could, like Radon Sante, you could put the planes in the sky, and you could, land with the guys in the ropes, the Jeff Prathers, and seize the servers and, go to an international port. So I don't know what Sidney Powell knows. I just know that Dominion has been doing this sort of election flipping for 20 years for the David Petreuses of the world. So where there's smoke, there's fire. That's where I look. So hopefully maybe she's knows something I don't know, and hopefully I have a little bit I can contribute to her.
Well said, and very, very sensitive too. I'm glad to participate in developing these thoughts with somebody like you, George, that does care and does not. You're not a grandstander. You want to support the people that are on the front lines and respect the front lines people as I do, and Professor as well. Well, gosh, I don't know, guys. Is there anything else we need to cover here? It's usually we're closing up the shop about 9, but because of a technical glitch, we got started a little late. I'm happy to go a little late if you guys want to. I haven't been able to look at the chat either for the same reason. I have a limited bandwidth here down on the shore.
Well, I would just like to conclude where I began. And as we're looking at the Dominion hardware and the IT systems and all that, we must also take a good look at the ghost in the machine, the spirit. Stop the steal, stop the spell. This equipment is haunted in a figurative sense. And I think we have to look at that in addition to the usual hardware approaches. That's my advice to Sidney Powell or anybody else who's doing forensic analysis of these systems. Check out the ghost in the machine.
Well, you can't leave it there because I have to make a comment.
All right.
Obviously referring to Tracy Kidder's Ghost in the Machine book and about Data General and how it was stolen. The deck or the Data General mini computer was stolen, and guess who was working there as a young intern was young Peter Strzok.
Oh no!
Yeah, young Peter Strzok, and young Peter Strzok is a part of Hillary Clinton's Secret Service team. She's the First Lady at that time in 1998-99. Peter Strzok goes to Kosovo with a young David Petraeus on his way up, who's a professor from Princeton working on nonviolent, low-intensity warfare, the canvas nonviolent type warfare with OT4 and so forth. Well, it turns out, fast forward now 20 years later, that IP address and that Serbian broadband company maps to KKNR and David Petraeus purchasing it. So,
my gosh,
the ghost in the machine is these people. That we have to look beyond the hardware. Sometimes I agree with you. Look to the people who are the ghosts in this machine, going back 20 years. And it is Kissinger. It is David Petraeus. It is the young Peter Strzok. And very well said, Doctor. I didn't bring that out, but it's something we have to look at. You have to round up the usual suspects if you're in Casablanca, right?
Right. They don't call them spooks for nothing.
Exactly. They're always going to show up when this nefarious activity happens.
Right. Look for the Caspers.
Well,
and they're not very friendly ghosts either.
I'm going to use my last word tonight to say let's get back to the book theme that we started off. And one of the books that I read on my channel, The Servitors of Empire by Professor Hamamoto, is one of the most enlightening books I've ever read in my entire life. And now I understand so much more about my own family's story. That there is this elite American ascendancy that does restrict itself to marrying within these elite families, and that they really do import people of different races, colors, languages, and create them as servitors that are never going to break into the elite class and always going to be tempted to go higher and higher, but by breaking their own moral barriers in order to achieve success underneath of this elite system that has been shown so well in your book about the Asian American experience, that I just see how the Irish American experience, the Scottish American experience, the so many others that we could look at. In reading books like Real Lace by Stephen Birmingham and understanding how the Irish were treated as those servitors in the sense of the 1900s and the 20th century, by agents of the church, by agents of the great British banks, and by agents of intelligence services, but always rise to the top, but then lose it. It would be taken away from them, and they would have been entrapped into some type of graft or some type of crime or other problem, just like the brownstoning operations that George Webb talks about in his reporting on things like DynCorp and all the great reporting that you've done, George. So my last word tonight is Servitors of Empire, a great book. Get a copy and read it, and you'll find out what I mean.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, John. We'll see you all next week.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks a million. Bye-bye.